let's talk about The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. So this was from 2006. It is book 1 in the Gentleman Bastard sequence. It is one of 3 so far, with the 4th apparently drafted. We'll see when that comes out. And the basic premise is that there is a gang of thieves, the Gentleman Bastards, in a crime-ridden Italian Renaissance-inspired city. I'll come back to that. That's an interesting point. But this gang is led by Locke Lamora, and they run big confidence scams. And the plot in this particular book runs on 2 tracks. The first is that the gang are setting up a new confidence scam. They're running a new confidence scam on some aristocrats. The second plot track is that there's a gang war brewing in the underworld. The long-term Don is having some issues. And there's also a kind of third track that's not the main plot, but is a flashback cycle that happens through, every few chapters there's an interlude. And these interludes talk about how the gang came together and building up the kind of family story of this close family unit via flashback and callback, rather than by kind of narrating it A to B. And the best way I can sum up my thoughts here is that I understand why this is such a well-loved book, why for some people it's their favourite book, despite the fact it has some pretty significant flaws in my view. So the big strengths are, I think, the world building. Some of the character work is very good. The conclusion is very good. There are also some good writing things. The writing things, for example, he's very good at doing set up and callback. Something happens and then later in the book it's called back to. Small things like that which are nice. The world building, I think, is the strongest individual thing for me, though. So Camor or Camor, the setting, the city is a pseudo Renaissance Venice, but much worse than Venice ever was. It's, Lynch has a really strong picture of the city, and it becomes a personality in its own right, from the slums to the middle class districts to the aristocratic buildings made of elder glass, which I'll come back to in a moment. We see a lot about the corrosive effect Camor has on people and the corrosive effect people have on Camor, and it really is a major player in the book. The hydrology, the oceanography, the fact that there are sharks in the water, all these things play in various ways. And other world-building elements are also very strong. The elder glass is indestructible glass, usually buildings built by the elders, I think they're called, or the elder race, who were here before humans, and there's no further detail. Where have they gone? Lynch sets up a number of mysteries like that. Also, as an example, with Sabetha, a character who we don't meet. But the elder glass is interesting. The magic is interesting. Our characters aren't magicians; they are ordinary people, but they interact with magic in different ways. Bonds mages with their kind of terrifying magic. Alchemists who make all kinds of things, from alchemical plants, hybrid plants, to potions, to other things like that. Lots of interesting magic. It is, in that sense, it's a high magic setting, but the way we experience it is as sword and sorcery, low magic in lots of ways. And I think that's very effective, both plot-wise, but also world-building-wise. The way we experience it is, in that sense, more Portal-like. We see it through the eyes of normal people. The character work at points is very good. Locke, particularly, I think, is well-drawn, compelling throughout. He has a character arc, both in the flashbacks. We see him as a very young boy, growing up to being a man, and the character tics and traits and needs that he has, the things he likes to do, the way that affects him and people around him, and the way that changes the plot, and then how that in turn affects his character, is very good classical character work. Father Chains, the mentor of the Gentleman Bastards, who we meet via flashback, he is also very good. He's very interesting, philosophical, and gives us a perspective on events. In a way, to a degree, he's the omniscient third-person narrator in the book. He tells us what we need to know to learn about the world. The conclusion, the last quarter or so, is, whilst not perfect, is very good. It's pacey, it's often dramatic, it's enjoyable, the action is good. It made the book hard to put down through that entire period. It was very much, for all the facts I think there were some pacing issues, I'll mention them in a moment, I think it's a book where once it got going, and particularly through the middle, and particularly at the end, it just didn't stop it. It didn't let up. And I think there's a gift in writing that makes that happen. It's not just, oh, I like the plot or the characters. For something to be unputdownable requires a degree of writing skill. There are notable issues, as I say. The flashbacks were not a problem. Lots of people don't like the flashbacks. I found them fine. They didn't find them confusing. I thought the story in the past was good. But yes, as some people say, the first fifth or quarter in the main timeline is quite slow because we're trying to set up a whole world and we're trying to set up the scam and give it legs and set up the characters, including flashing back so regularly. Flashbacks are more common in the first half than the second half. And I think that does mean the pacing suffers and makes you think about like, oh, this is interesting, but where's the meat? You know, what's going to happen? Where are we going with this? The story also raises moral questions. I think this is interesting because this is a philosophical novel in lots of ways, and we see that with Father James particularly, but also some of the other characters. The story raises moral questions. Is it actually morally acceptable to rob the rich because they don't deserve it? Do they deserve it? On what basis do people deserve things like that? And that is a question that it raises early on, and I think is an interesting question. Or again, what is the role of violence in the life of integrity? Who do you owe loyalty to in the final event? What price glory? All these are good questions, and many of them it never really settles adequately. So, for instance, that question of, is it really moral to do what the gentleman bastards do? Raised really interestingly, in a way almost infuriatingly, but sort of brushed off in the end, kind of resolved, in my view, in a way, you know, it's one way, there are multiple ways the book could do it, and it resolved it one way, but it was all a bit cheap, and then sort of pushed under the carpet in a way that's very convenient for Lynch. There is some very explicit violence, and though your mileage may vary and you may take a very different view on this, I think virtually never does gory violence really up the stakes in the way that we perhaps think it does, in my experience. I think things can be, if you like, sometimes things can be better told than shown because the emotional impact ends up the same. Sometimes characters are drawn too lightly or briefly to matter as much as they need to, or as much as we are told they matter. And that means that action that hinges on them or decisions they make don't matter as much. As an example, the Kappa Bar Savi's 3 children, I liked them. I thought they were interesting so far as we got pictures of them. They're semi-important characters, they are second tier, but they don't matter that much in dramatic stakes because we don't know them that well. And that's a shame because I think they're interesting. And of course, people have said the same thing about other characters in the book as well. And you can maybe listen to, if you've read it, you'll know who I'm talking about probably as to who you might say that about. And there is an issue of a big plot scene right down the middle of the book. I mean, pretty much, first half, second half. And it's really obvious to me, at least, there are, and I think it's actually something which indicates that there may have been changes early in the structure of the book. There are questions of secret identity and mystery and why things are happening in a certain way and who's behind X and Y and all that sort of thing through the first half or 2/3 of the book. And pretty explicitly and openly that's the case. It's a major point from fairly early in the book. At least you get the first hints of it fairly early in the book. But then resolved in a way that jarred and felt stitched together to me. And if you've read the book, you may disagree, and I'd love to hear where you are on that. But for me, it felt very stitched together. And that meant that though I enjoyed the conclusion, I was a bit like, oh, okay, we'll do this. Yeah, this sounds good. Okay, let's go. And that's not really where you want to be. You could say there's a few other things. As much as I liked the ending, there is a degree to which stuff felt a bit thrown at the wall at points in it. And that's part of what made it work. But it's worth saying that it connects to this plot seam issue, that there is a sense that Lynch just has a burden to lay down. He's trying to get everything out there, get it all on the page, all these ideas, and he gets away with it. The prestige comes off, but perhaps it's not as artful as it could be. And I don't think that's just a question of, oh, if only it had a 3-act structure. I think it's because in that case there should be no issue with any book that has a 3-act structure as far as pacing goes. But I think it's just there are so many different things he's trying to weave in as at this point a debut novelist as well, debutante. this isn't a modern classic in the way some people speak of it. I think it's not it's not a future all-time great that will be saying, man, he really perfected this. Nor is it a seminal work which completely changed everything in the way that it probably feels like, at least, the Song of Ice and Fire books, particularly Game of Thrones, did genre-wise, and that certainly did genre-wise. It was a massive impact on the next generation, including Scott Lynch, Joe Abercrombie. It was a big influence on a certain set of writers and on agents signing those writers. It's not seminal in that sense. It does excel at world building, and that's something which I think you could easily see it recommended for in the future. However, I say all that and would still say this is a very, very, very good book. That has to be enough, doesn't it, for a book? It's a very good book. I enjoyed it a lot. It was well worth reading, and so I read this because it was recommended by Furroy, one of my subscribers, and I'm grateful for the recommendation because I really enjoyed it. I'm still deciding whether to continue with the series, but I wouldn't say I'm against the idea of continuing. It's a sort of time, effort, vector thing. Anyway, if you've read it, tell me what you think in the comments. Tell me if you've enjoyed the rest of the series. Tell me if you agree with the criticisms I've made and the praise I've offered it. I'd like to hear all of that, so tell me in the comments. Till next time.